He spent his life as the family's throwaway son. He clawed his way to the ninth circle of magic fueled by pure hatred. He hunted the dragon he was supposed to marry and killed her for power. Then he lost everything anyway, so Ferda Resnova rewrote fate itself. He went back to the day his engagement was sealed, and this time he walked straight toward the dragon he once destroyed. I married the dragon I killed, and this is his second chance. The engagement to Grand Duke Valdrova is official, and Ferda Resnova has no way back. The decree hits like a death sentence stamped across his family's desk, binding the third son of House Resnova to the most feared dragon in the empire. For any noble, this political marriage is effectively a one-way ticket to ruin, leaving Ferda with two impossible choices: exile from everything he knows, or total destruction at the hands of his own bloodline. When all he ever wanted was a place within his family, being the third son born to a concubine meant he spent his life struggling with a weak, sickly body, while the household staff mocks his lack of talent and his pathetic, endless training, forcing him to endure every bit of their disdain entirely on his own. Yet he kept pushing forward, convinced that if he just gave enough effort, he might finally earn the acknowledgement and respect he was so desperately chasing, even holding onto a naive, hopeful belief that his family would eventually come around, until the reality of their cruelty came crashing down during his training, shattering his resolve as they told him he did not even have the right to try, mocking his very existence and insulting his eyes as if they were stains on their lineage, leaving him to watch them walk away as he realized the family he craved never wanted him. And seeing their cold, detached backs turned toward him for the final time, crushed his spirit under the weight of their long-standing indifference, so he finally makes the only choice left and declares he is leaving the family for good. The patriarch finally gives his cold approval, cutting Ferda off completely, so the young man walks away from the family gate, leaving his old life behind for good, and accepts the harsh truth that he is no longer a part of the lineage, looking at his own hands and remembering how hard he tried to be enough, while a surge of pure dark resentment takes root deep in his soul, fueling a vow that he will make them all pay for discarding him, and at 18 he finally awakens as a mage. Defying every expectation, even though the other apprentices laugh at his late start and lack of potential, mocking his supposed inability to grasp the basics of internal mana, but Ferda ignores their taunts and unleashes a terrifying, raw surge of power, revealing a unique, blood-red circle of mana born entirely from his bitter hatred, which pulses with a violent intensity that leaves the other students trembling in fear, because he realizes the more he hates, the stronger his magical core becomes, and fueled by this dark obsession, he eventually reaches the legendary sixth circle, returning to the family estate only to systematically dismantle everything they ever built, forcing the same servants who once mocked him to turn their blades on each other, while the eldest brothers are consumed by the same magical hatred until they fall, leading finally to the patriarch, the man who caused his deepest, longest-lasting pain. And Ferda forces him to watch his entire legacy crumble into nothingness, standing amidst the ruin of the house, having successfully erased the family that destroyed him. The young man stands amidst the wreckage of his past, but the fire in his soul refuses to dim as he realizes that even after destroying his lineage, the thirst for vengeance remains unsatisfied, and soon a coalition of warriors emerges to brand him a global threat. Yet he survives their onslaught, ascending to the eighth circle of human magic, becoming a great mage who knows his enemies will never stop seeking retribution, so he commits himself to reaching the legendary ninth circle, poring over ancient, forbidden texts that hold the secret to godlike power, until he discovers a cruel irony hidden within those dusty pages. For the path to ultimate strength requires the heart of a sovereign dragon, so he tracks the beast to its mountain lair under the pale moonlight, where he finds the creature that was once intended to be his fiancée, and the young man stands before the dragon, ready to claim her life, coughing up blood from the wounds he sustained during their brutal clash. While he curses the tyrant for the suffering that defined his entire existence, even as the dragon mocks his claim and demands to know the source of his hatred, questioning why he holds such malice toward a creature that has never touched his life, which only pushes the young man further into a fit of desperate, agonizing rage, because he cannot accept her claim of innocence after everything he has endured, and he points his finger at the dragon, blaming her and his family's greed for his ruin. Valdrova challenges Ferda's accusations, demanding to know if the blame truly lies with her, but Ferda spirals into a frenzy, screaming that the dragon's greed is the root of his misery, and Valdrova pauses, her claw twitching as if she is finally processing the depth of his hatred, leaving Ferda confused by her sudden, eerie stillness, though he shakes it off, deciding that her reaction is irrelevant compared to the mana he has just finished gathering. While Valdrova declares they have finally reached an understanding and prepares to end the fight, her massive claw lunges forward with terrifying speed, forcing Ferda to frantically deploy a defensive magic circle to survive the onslaught. Yet a single drop of blood drips from his eye as the pressure begins to overwhelm him, and to his utter disbelief, Valdrova drives her own claw deep into her chest, piercing her own heart while Ferda watches in total shock. Because she knows his ultimate goal requires the heart of a sovereign dragon, and he realizes with a jolt of horror that she is attempting to destroy the very prize he came to claim, which forces him to scream for her to stop before she ruins his only path to the ninth circle, while he desperately lunges toward her to prevent the destruction of her heart. But the dragon's core begins to shatter and crack under the intensity of her self-inflicted strike. And Ferda curses her existence as the energy begins to spiral out of control, causing the dragon's body to disintegrate into light as her life force fades away. So the precious heart he needed is obliterated in a blinding flash of golden light, leaving Ferda shouting in frustration as his only hope for power turns to nothing. The light from within the core suddenly flares, and the young man stops in his tracks as the heart remains perfectly intact. So he demands to know why the dragon would go to such lengths, especially when she could have easily killed him had she just fought back. But the dragon reveals that she and her kind have been miserable for a very long time because they have always loathed their own existence, despising the violent, uncontrollable blood that flows through their veins. Yet they found themselves unable to stop the destruction they caused, and the dragon explains that her very presence brings nothing but terror to the world, where cities burn and innocents suffer whenever she is near. So she believes that her death is the only way to resolve this cycle of pain, though she admits she foolishly clung to life, hoping for a happiness that never came, while her existence only continued to bring more misery to those around her, and she prays that by ending her life, the young man might find some peace. Then the connection between them fades into a cold, empty void, leaving the dragon's body to dissolve completely, and the young man is left standing alone, overwhelmed by a strange, bitter sensation as he struggles to comprehend the heavy emotions washing over him. So he curses the dragon for shaking his resolve even at the very end, but he refuses to give up as the potential of the ninth circle remains right before his eyes. Ferda seizes the dragon's heart, ready to claim its power as his own, and as the essence drips into him, he prepares for his final evolution, shouting in agony as he plans to transcend humanity and emerge as a demigod. But the raw energy shatters the space around him, forcing him into a blinding void where he drifts in a state of confusion, wondering why his breakthrough feels so wrong since he clearly consumed the heart, but he feels like he is plummeting into an infinite abyss. And he witnesses a vision of the dragon curled in sorrow, while the weight of her ancient misery crashes into his mind with crushing force. So he realizes in shock that he is experiencing the very memories of the dragon, and the sheer scale of her despair hits him so hard he collapses, gasping as he finally sees the truth behind her long life, where he finds a deep, ancient sorrow that makes his own struggles seem like nothing, which leaves him feeling small and pathetic for ever questioning her choice to end it all. So he begins to question his own motivations, asking what he truly wanted to achieve as he recalls his original simple desire to be a mage, back when he was just a child dreaming of a normal, happy life, drawing pictures of a family and hoping for a future filled with peace, and comparing that innocent dream to his current path of cold, calculated power. He finally understands that the dragon shared the exact same longing for connection, so he calls out her name in regret, realizing how futile his quest for godhood has become. The young man stands over the fallen dragon, realizing that all his power and ambition have led only to this empty, cold ending, and he stares into the void, finding no purpose in the victory he spent his life chasing. So he decides to pour every ounce of his remaining magical essence into the ultimate ninth circle spell, activating the forbidden wish, only to feel the crushing weight of everything he has lost. Then a voice calls out his name, snapping him from the magical decay, and he blinks, finding himself suddenly transported back to a familiar, stifling study, where his father sits, sternly demanding his attention and scolding him for his lack of focus. So the young man realizes he has been thrust back into the most painful day of his past, as his father confirms that his engagement to the Grand Duke has been finalized, and he hears the cold ultimatum that refusal means ruin for the entire family line, while his father warns him of the consequences with a sharp, dismissive edge. Then he takes a trembling step, finally grasping the terrifying truth that he has truly returned in time. So he bows his head and calmly accepts the marriage, leaving his father completely caught off guard by the sudden shift, as he vows internally to embrace this path and change the fate that once destroyed him. While elsewhere, his brother hears the news of the engagement with a look of pure, calculated malice. And the brother wonders why someone so pathetic would willingly walk into such a lethal trap. Then he questions the servants to confirm that the young man is still brooding in his room. So the brother smirks, already imagining the humiliation he plans to inflict on his sibling as he marches down the corridor, intent on confronting the young man before the engagement can proceed, and he kicks the door open, bellowing for his brother to get out of his sight immediately. Huron Risnova bursts into the room expecting a meltdown, but he is immediately caught off guard, because Ferda Risnova is already dressed and calmly preparing for the ceremony without any help, questioning why his brother barged in without even a knock. While the servants scurry away at Ferda Risnova's request to handle the preparations entirely on his own, Huron Risnova sneers that his brother is just a loser walking into a death sentence. But Ferda Risnova simply reminds him that this political marriage is an order from their family. Huron Risnova scoffs at the idea, warning him that the previous royal fiancé met a gruesome end. Ferda Risnova acknowledges he knows the risks, keeping his composure despite the provocation, as he recalls the legend of the third prince who was once the empire's perfect candidate, a man so esteemed that he even dared to refuse the violent dragon's hand in marriage. But that refusal turned out to be a fatal mistake in the eyes of the beast, The third prince suffered a horrific fate for his defiance and was beaten to a pulp by the dragon's wrath. Ferda Rasnova ignores the grim reminder, pushing past Huron Rasnova's hand as he prepares to leave. Huron Rasnova taunts him, asking if he really thinks he can survive where a prince failed. Then Huron Rasnova tries to physically intimidate him, threatening to take his head if he dares disobey family orders. Ferda Rasnova stops him with a cold glare, telling his brother to mind his own business and keep his pants in check. The comment about his lustful gaze hits home, leaving Huron Rasnova visibly shaking with rage. Huron Rasnova lunges forward in a blind fury, but Ferda Rasnova calmly warns him to hold back, because unlike their childhood, Ferda Rasnova refuses to let a single mark appear on his face before the wedding. Ferda Rasnova walks toward the waiting carriage, leaving his past behind as the staff watches him depart. His loyal attendant wipes away tears, marking the end of their long and difficult service together. The elderly servant expresses his gratitude for the time spent serving, though Ferda Rasnova knows the truth because the young man realizes he was poisoned for years, and he finally sees the betrayal for what it was. Childhood memories of being served tainted meals reveal that even those closest to him were complicit in his slow decline. Fury briefly flares as he remembers the suffocating control of his past. Ferda Rasnova offers a parting word of comfort to the old man, pretending to be unaware of the hidden malice. The servant is caught off guard by the unexpected kindness, completely misinterpreting the young master's true intent, leaving the estate behind. Ferda Rasnova steps into the carriage and begins his journey toward an uncertain future. Sitting in the quiet cabin, he reflects on the peace that comes after exacting his long-awaited vengeance. His mind drifts back to the hollow satisfaction he once felt while wading through blood and chaos. The burning desire for retribution has finally faded, leaving only a strange and heavy silence in its place. Looking out at the passing landscape, he begins to see the world with a clarity he never possessed before. Using dark magic was like an addictive poison that numbed his soul while granting him immense, destructive power. Those early days of slaughter felt exhilarating and refreshing, but that fleeting high eventually turned into an inescapable addiction. The weight of that corrupted heart still echoes within him, a constant reminder of the monster he nearly became. Closing his eyes, he acknowledges the lingering ghosts of his past choices. He refuses to continue living as a slave to that insatiable bloodlust or the darkness that defined his previous life. Savoring the taste of a simple meal, he finds comfort in the small, normal things he was denied for so long. As the carriage arrives at his destination, he wonders if he can finally leave the path of a mage behind for good. The sign warns that the territory ahead belongs to the Grand Duke, and entering is strictly prohibited. Ferda Rasnova sits by the boundary, realizing that abandoning his carriage was the right move since the driver was terrified of what lurks here. The coward speeds away into the distance, leaving him completely alone in this dangerous, monster-ridden zone. He considers his lack of surveillance an advantage for now, though he knows he must master magic to survive whatever might be hunting in the woods. A sudden movement in the brush catches his attention, and he turns just in time to spot a girl approaching through the trees. The newcomer introduces herself as Ruri, a servant serving Lady Valdrova. Confirming his identity, she bows politely and offers to lead him toward the castle. The path ahead winds through the brush, guiding him deeper into the forbidden territory, while the Arkan Empire prides itself on absolute conquest. The reality of their power is far more limited than their propaganda suggests. The eastern demonic lands are a chaotic, monster-filled disaster that no human army has ever managed to pacify. The only force capable of stopping the constant surge of creatures is the legendary red dragon Valdrova. Although people call her an evil dragon, she remains the sole line of defense against the abyss. Dark creatures loom in the shadows as Ferda Rasnova notes how easily the Empire slanders the dragon. His focus shifts to the immediate danger when a monster attacks, and he barely manages to block the strike. Ruri steps in to reassure him, telling him there is no need for worry. She promises that as long as she is present, no flying monster will dare to launch an attack. The maid mentions they have a 2-hour walk ahead of them before reaching their destination. Yet she casually remarks that if she traveled on her own, the trip would take less than 10 seconds. Watching her navigate the wild, he realizes that this maid is far more capable than her appearance suggests. The maid Ruri reveals her true nature as a dragon spawn, complete with hidden horns and a tail, and her physical power is clearly on an entirely different level than any ordinary creature. Ferda Rasnova wonders if they should just fly to their destination to save some time, but Ruri objects to the idea of carrying him through the air, and despite his insistence that he can handle it, she firmly shuts down the suggestion, so they are forced to keep walking through the wild. And after a short break, Ruri urges Ferda Rasnova to hurry because their master is waiting, which leaves him feeling a bit awkward about the whole situation. As he sighs to himself that getting married is never actually easy, they finally reach the massive, imposing entrance to the dragon's lair, and Ferda Rasnova immediately feels a crushing, heavy aura radiating from behind the heavy iron door. He notes the sheer pressure of the dragon's presence as Ruri prepares to deliver a message. She instructs him to stay silent while she acts as the intermediary for their meeting. But a sudden, sharp glare from the darkness makes it clear that the dragon is already watching them. Ruri quickly bows and presents the official message from the Grand Duke Valdrova. The dragon explains that while Ferda Rasnova was sent by the Empire to be engaged, she has no intention of forcing a marriage and offers him the chance to leave. This rejection catches him off guard, but his resolve does not waver. He reflects on how his past self might have just accepted the dismissal, but he declares that the current version of himself is different, and he intends to pursue this bond of his own will. Ferda Rasnova stands his ground, refusing to back down from the engagement, and Ruri hesitates, clearly reluctant to pass such a defiant message to the dragon, until she finally grips the heavy sack of gold offered as a bribe. The dragon acknowledges his determination but doubles down on the offer, promising him enough wealth to start a new life elsewhere, sprawling across a literal mountain of treasure. The beast insists that he should just take the payout and leave, but Ferda Rasnova pushes back, declaring that he has absolutely no interest in mere gold or worldly power. His only goal remains securing the engagement to Valdrova, despite the massive size difference between them. Ruri lets out an audible sigh, clearly feeling the weight of the awkward situation, and she tightens her grip, ready to do whatever is necessary to handle this stubborn suitor. The dragon stops mincing words and prepares to deliver a final, blunt warning. When the dragon notes the harsh tone is coming directly from Ferda Rasnova, not his master, claws sharpen and the atmosphere turns hostile, signaling that negotiations are officially over. A wave of overwhelming pressure slams into the room, forcing Ruri to the ground. Ferda Rasnova struggles to stay upright as he realizes he's being hit by a concentrated blast of dragon fear. Valdrova mocks them both, labeling them as nothing more than ambitious trash unworthy of her time or attention. The dragon reveals that the third prince was killed, specifically for trying to manipulate her through marriage, and she confirms that the prince's head was filled with the exact same pathetic delusions. A flashback shows the royal in question, grinning with his marriage proposal and oblivious to his impending end. Valdrova's eyes burn with intensity as she recalls how shameless and exposed the man truly was, and she dismisses the entire attempt as nothing but pure, inexcusable arrogance. Valdrova pins Ruri to the floor with a massive tale, comparing the maid's fate to the dead prince. Ferda Rasnova barely gathers his breath while looking the dragon straight in the eye, and he does not even flinch, keeping his composure despite the crushing aura, swearing an oath that his words are entirely his own, not some puppet's script. He declares that no coercion or greed brought him here to face her, thinking back to a past where he failed to protect someone he loved. He vows that this time he will be the one standing by her side, stating clearly that his goal is to become her legitimate husband and partner, and he tells the dragon to address him directly instead of through a servant. Valdrova's claws dig into the ground as she seethes at his sheer, unadulterated audacity. She lets out a surge of raw, killing intent that sends the room into a frenzy. Then she steps back, dismissing the moment with a cold and cryptic farewell. Ruri is left behind, clutching the message and repeating his words like a prayer, and she delivers his bold proposal directly to the supreme power looming in the dark. The dragon ruler listens from the shadows, dwarfing the tiny maid in comparison. Valdrova wonders aloud if he truly meant those ridiculous claims. She finds herself uncharacteristically intrigued by the sheer nerve of this human, asking Ruri for a physical description of the man who just dared to challenge her, and the maid describes him as a weak, dying human, only for the dragon to demand his looks. Ruri corrects herself to admit he is actually quite handsome, leaving the dragon to ponder his true nature. Ruri hesitates as she tries to put the man's audacity into words, eventually admitting to Valdrova that the guy is truly extraordinary. The dragon dismisses mortals as trivial pawns but cannot shake the memory of his defiance. She admits that Ferda Rasnova did not even flinch when she unleashed her killing intent, and Valdrova muses that if he can withstand that, he might actually be worth a look. A smirk crosses her face as she processes the implication. Ruri turns to catch the shift in the dragon's mood. Valdrova finds the idea of a human meeting her gaze genuinely fascinating, deciding she wants to face him normally. The maid asks for clarification on what she means by normal. Ruri waits in silence as the dragon finalizes her decision. She announces that the engagement is moving forward and sends Ruri to fetch the man. The maid leads Ferda Rasnova through the massive, cavernous halls of the dragon's lair. They reach the guest quarters, which looks surprisingly well kept for a monster's home. Ferda Rasnova notes the cleanliness and asks Ruri if anyone else lives here. She snaps that she is the master's sole servant and he is merely a guest. The young man points out that he is technically her fiancé, not just a guest. Ruri retorts that the ceremony has not happened yet and calls him a guest again. She explains that the private engagement ceremony will happen in 1 month inside the lair. Ferda Rasnova accepts the timeline, while Ruri remains visibly annoyed by his persistent attitude. Ferda Rasnova agrees that 1 month is plenty of time, but Ruri quickly cuts him off with a reality check, informing him that the engagement will not be handed to him on a silver platter, and that he has exactly 30 days to prove he has the stature of a supreme companion, because he needs to demonstrate he is qualified to be the dragon's fiancé. So the young man realizes just how difficult this marriage arrangement is going to be, questioning if Ruri is acting on her own rather than following the dragon's command, which the maid confirms, admitting the master does not know she is testing him, but she insists his current physical state shows potential that he needs to unlock. Since failure means he will never be recognized as the Grand Duke's partner, Ferda Rasnova takes a deep breath and chooses to accept the challenge, noticing that his future bride clearly keeps high-quality people by her side. and he cannot help but respect a retainer who puts her master's needs above her own feelings. Though he wonders why he did not see her at the end of the previous timeline, he asks if he needs to become an emperor to satisfy her standards. Finding it ironic that a maid is setting a bar higher than any empire could demand, the young man agrees to her terms with a calm and collected demeanor, which confuses the maid and leaves her questioning why he is so relaxed about this. He clarifies that he neither looks down on dragons nor is he acting foolish, promising that within a month he will show enough ability to convince even her. Ruri cannot help but question where this young man actually comes from. While the night settles over the quiet estate, Ferda Resnova starts his training by reflecting on his complete lack of current power, though he knows the secret of reaching the ninth circle from his previous life. So he focuses on reclaiming that specific sensation of magical flow, realizing the first circle is the critical foundation that shapes a mage's mana path, which forces him to remember the dangers of the red circle born from raw hatred, a path he knows all too well from the regrets of his past, and he clenches his fist while vowing to avoid that self-destructive road, choosing instead to cultivate a stable and unshakable foundation this time around. A week of intense meditation passes by, yet he remains stuck in his room grinding away at his mana, finding the process of forming the blue circle incredibly difficult to stabilize. And he sighs as another attempt at manifestation flickers out and dies, acknowledging that while he expects the blue path to take years, his impatience is growing. 3 weeks vanish into thin air. Ruri enters with his meal, noting that his daily routine has barely shifted at all, and she watches him eat while he maintains his focus on the task, admitting to himself that his progress is stalled and a new strategy is required. So he changes his grip on his spoon and pours his mana into the meal itself. Ferda Resnova feels a sudden vibration and asks what it is, so Ruri explains that Valdrova is currently out subjugating monsters in the demonic lands, and Ferda Resnova gazes out the window, clearly intrigued by the mention of that name, telling Ruri he wants to see that battle firsthand, but she strongly advises against it, warning that no human could endure the raw power on display there, flatly telling Ferda Resnova he would only embarrass himself if he tried to watch. Yet he ignores the caution and grips his hand, declaring that as her future companion he must see this struggle with his own eyes, and in a blur of movement they traverse the distance, flying across the sky with speed that mimics actual teleportation, finally touching down at their destination, where Ruri lands gracefully while Ferda Resnova struggles to keep his footing, feeling nauseous from the rapid transit until she tells him to stop worrying about her and look ahead. At which point they survey the horizon together, and Ferda Resnova stares in total disbelief at the scene unfolding before them, realizing that the source of the immense pressure is indeed where Valdrova is fighting, where the ground shakes under the impact of monstrous tentacles and explosive force, as a dragon-like creature clashes against the overwhelming surge of power, leaving Ferda Resnova to witness the sheer chaos of the battlefield. The dragon's massive claws tear into the rocky terrain, and its armored jaws lock onto the monster's neck with brutal precision, pinning the creature down while the dragon exerts absolute dominance. Then it spreads its wings to unleash a devastating barrage of energy, pouring torrents of fire breath across the battlefield, causing Ruri to brace herself against the shockwave, while the dragon lets out a deafening, visceral roar, which projects a beam of pure destruction straight into the sky, forcing Ferda Resnova to clutch his chest as the overwhelming pressure hits him, until he collapses to the ground, crushed by the sheer weight of that power, leaving the young man panting in terror as the dragon's gaze fixes on him, and Ruri mockingly reminds him of how ridiculous it is for a mere human to bind himself to such a being, pointing out that the rampaging beast is the true form of his future companion, while Ferda Resnova trembles, barely able to process the lethal intensity before him, because she makes it clear that this creature is what he is destined to marry. So his hand shakes uncontrollably as he reaches out toward the ledge, while Ruri watches him with a cold, detached expression, explaining that this is a red dragon, a legendary embodiment of evil intent, possessing a bloodlust so violent that it naturally destroys everything in its path, and she questions if he truly understands the weight of becoming a dragon's spouse. Ruri declares that humans and dragons are fundamentally incompatible, while she insists that her master will soon abandon his foolish dream of a union, yet Ferda Resnova only repeats the word truly under his breath, and he flashes a genuine, captivated smile while whispering that it is magnificent, which throws Ruri off balance as she realizes he is not terrified at all, so she recoils in genuine confusion, wondering if the young man is actually a masochist. As the night settles over the grounds after the display of power, Ferda Resnova admits to himself that despite the physical toll, he was ready for this, although his body is currently shattered and shaking from the raw dragon fear, and he recalls the maid pulling him back as he faced the ordeal, thinking that it is a miracle his mind remains intact even if he lost a whole day. So he stands alone in the field, trying to process the encounter while he reflects on the sheer scale of what he witnessed. And he relives the moment the beast unleashed its destructive aura, realizing that despite the overwhelming terror, he found himself desperate to keep watching because he understands the dragon is only tearing through the continent to protect her own, proving that her violence is a shield for the things she holds dear. And he compares her path to the arduous steps of a noble knight, murmuring that the display was truly wonderful as he resolves to follow her no matter the cost of their connection. Ferda Resnova feels a sudden, sharp spike of mana radiating from his chest, and he realizes this volatile energy is not what he needs, so he forces himself to reject the dark power to avoid repeating past mistakes. Then a single drop of blood hits the ground, creating a ripple that leaves him questioning what this power truly is, and he sees the image of Valdrova flash before his eyes as he struggles to control his own mana. While he notices his mana circuit clearing up, the more he recalls that encounter, feeling an emotion that is neither anger nor pure vengeance. So he closes his eyes to center himself, and he drifts into a meditative state, recognizing this fleeting, unique sensation that threatens to scatter if he loses focus. Then he begins to compress and spin the energy rapidly between his palms, concentrating all his will into the swirling vortex, as the mana collapses into a dense, dark core of power, proving that the same future of past failures will not happen again. And he finally stabilizes his breathing, feeling the change take hold, while Ruri enters the room and demands to know how he managed to open his circuit overnight, and she notes his sharp eye for detail, while remarking that his gasping for breath yesterday made such a feat seem impossible. So Ferda Resnova brushes it off by saying he is no ordinary person, causing Ruri to look on with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Then he asks for her assessment, and she admits he has met the basic criteria despite having a long way to go, and he nods, satisfied with his progress, before asking where he can begin his formal magic training, while the scene shifts to a training ground where targets stand waiting in the distance, and Ruri finishes setting up the practice area with a quick motion, so she presents the completed training course to Ferda Resnova, signaling that his real work is about to begin. Ferda Resnova applauds the maid for setting up the training ground, but Ruri questions why he requested basic targets instead of expensive magical artifacts, so he explains that learning to control mana efficiency is his top priority, prompting Ruri to ask if he believes that breathing is a skill that requires formal training, and she wonders if he considers her own natural draconic instincts to be barbaric. Leaving Ferda Resnova to ponder how a mere human could ever truly grasp such ancient draconic power, then he walks toward the field, inviting her to watch his breathing technique in action, describing the blue circle as the foundation of all proper mana manipulation. Yet he reveals that his own internal core burns with a chaotic red intensity, forcing him to harmonize his volatile emotions with the raw pressure of his mana, because he spent years in his past life struggling to condense this destructive point, and now he recreates that same agonizing effort in a matter of heartbeats, manifesting a dense orb of energy right at his fingertips, causing Ruri to gasp in disbelief as she witnesses his flawless execution on the very first try, while Ferda Resnova continues to weave multiple spheres of concentrated light around his hand. Then he flicks his finger, launching the projectiles toward the distant practice targets with lethal precision. And the mana bullets streak across the air, tearing through the atmosphere before detonating against the equipment in a violent display of controlled force, where Ferda Resnova notes with a wry smile that the targets held together better than expected, leaving Ruri to stare at him in stunned silence as she processes the sheer scale of his potential. Valdrova reviews the latest report on the young man, acknowledging his sudden magical awakening, and she presses the maid for her honest assessment of how he truly behaves, where Ruri confesses that his technique was flawless from the very first moment, which leads the maid to conclude that his performance is far too perfect for any normal human, forcing Valdrova to admit that such a high level of skill is inherently suspicious. But she decides to give him the benefit of the doubt for now despite her deep-seated cynicism, although Ruri remains wary because of the trauma her master has suffered at human hands, and she resolves to find a way to test his true intentions once and for all. So she suggests to Valdrova that they entrust a specific task to him to gauge his character, leaving the Grand Duke curious about exactly what kind of test she has in mind. Meanwhile, Ferda Resnova makes his grand entrance into the Coalition Hall, where a group of gathered lords sits around a table waiting for the Grand Duke, and the men gossip about the upcoming arrival of the Grand Duke's new young fiancée, wondering why someone would dare to take on such a position as mere political fodder, while they mock the idea of an 18-year-old from the Resnova family acting as a consort, dismissing him as a weak and incompetent child who would likely fail as a warrior. As the Count predicts that the Grand Duke will tear the boy to shreds before long, then the heavy doors swing open to signal that Ferda Resnova has finally arrived, and the young man walks into the room with a calm and collected expression, while Ruri prompts him to prepare himself for the challenge of meeting the lords. Ferda Resnova keeps his focus on the books, ignoring the tension, while the history of the Grand Duke recounts how she once slew the legendary Black Dragon, and Ruri explains that Valdrova earned her title through that single brutal feat, so now she expects Ferda Resnova to manage the eastern territories while she handles external affairs, essentially leaving him in charge of the household, which feels like a test of his ambition, but he realizes she still does not trust him. So he decides to confront those lords directly, and he steps into the Coalition Hall to face the waiting council, immediately asking how he should address them to set the stage for their dynamic. Yet the group of lords already plans to belittle him, hoping to establish dominance early, so one sneering lord claims they are the pillars of the empire, and they argue that he must show them the respect due to his elders, reminding him that they served the empire long before he was even born. while they mockingly suggest he should show them common courtesy as a newcomer, so Ferda Rasnova pushes back, asking if he should treat them as equals or as inferiors, which forces the lead lord to drop the facade and demand a clear answer, and the young man coldly explains that he intends to change how they operate, though his mention of potential exploitation causes an immediate, explosive outburst from the council, so he quickly backtracks to smooth things over while their hostility spikes. And the lead lord turns personal, mocking his status as a cast-off from the Rasnova family, while Ferda Rasnova simply dismisses their fourth circle magic as decent but ultimately irrelevant. The lead lord snaps after being insulted, his blood pressure clearly hitting the ceiling, and he screams that a fourth circle mage commands respect, especially against a first circle amateur, so he starts channeling raw magical energy into his hand to silence the young man, but Ferda Rasnova calmly holds up a hand to stop him, offering a different way to settle this, proposing they step into a duel to test exactly what a first circle mage can do. While the surrounding lords whisper about the obvious outcome, wondering if the older mage will actually hold back, and Ruri watches the standoff silently from the sidelines, as both men take their positions in the center of the hall when the older mage demands to know what kind of magic Ferda Rasnova intends to use, but the young man deflects the question, calling the demand for his secrets incredibly rude, so the older mage laughs, taunting his opponent by saying he can still forfeit before things get dangerous. Then he declares he will use a fourth-tier magic blast to finish this quickly, and the crowd panics as they realize that spell is meant for pure destruction. So Ferda Rasnova finally reveals his counter, stating he will simply use a mana shot, which makes the older mage sneer at the thought of winning with such a basic technique. But Ferda Rasnova stands his ground, confident that he knows exactly what he is doing. And the older mage loses his composure entirely, cursing the young man for his arrogance as he begins to weave a massive, complex spell circle, while the air vibrates with immense pressure, forcing the young man to recognize his opponent is tapping into a red circle, and the older mage screams his intent to erase his rival, leaving everyone watching in total shock. Ferda Rasnova declares the match finished, unleashing a concentrated mana shot directly at his opponent, so the older mage frantically throws up a defensive barrier to deflect the incoming projectile, but the blast bypasses the barrier entirely, hitting the complex magic circle behind him instead, and the older mage realizes with dread that his incomplete spell is being systematically dismantled. As the structure of his fourth-tier magic circle shatters under the sheer precision of the mana shot, causing the older mage to reel back in pure disbelief that his own technique was erased, while he stares at his hands, questioning how a mere first-circle mage could possibly possess such power, because destroying a magic circle that effortlessly is a feat even he cannot replicate, and the older mage's hands tremble as he processes the absolute collapse of his offensive capability. So he falls to his knees in the dust, completely defeated and out of breath, while he gasps for air, struggling to accept that he actually lost the duel. Then Ferda Rasnova steps forward, calmly asking if the older mage is ready to yield, and the older mage mumbles to himself, his ego shattered by the sudden display of mastery while he confesses a desperate desire to grow stronger, his pride finally replaced by genuine humility, so he formally admits his defeat, offering to do anything if it means gaining that level of strength, as the crowd whispers in confusion about how a first-circle mage could hide such talent, while Ruri coldly dismisses the onlookers, suggesting they gouge their eyes out if they cannot comprehend the reality of the duel. Then Ferda Rasnova pulls the older mage to his feet, complimenting his technique despite the outcome, so the older mage introduces himself as Thessalos Vulture, finally showing respect to his superior. And Ferda Rasnova pauses, his expression darkening as he recognizes the name of his new acquaintance. Ferda Rasnova recognizes the name and coolly claims the older mage was his benefactor in a past life, but the older mage is clearly bewildered, pointing at himself while questioning when they ever crossed paths, and without a second of hesitation, Ferda Rasnova fires a point-blank mana shot directly into him, so the older mage is struck down instantly, his life extinguished before he can even comprehend what happened, leaving the surrounding lords in absolute terror as they watch the brutal execution unfold, while Ferda Rasnova stands over the corpse, entirely unfazed by the sudden display of lethal force, because he declares that letting a man like that live would only bring grief to the Grand Duchess, and the onlookers scramble to process the scene, staring at the fallen body on the floor, while they whisper in horror that a noble has just been murdered in cold blood. Since the rules of the duel were ignored and a life was taken without any legal recourse, so the crowd trembles, terrified by the realization that no one can actually stop him, yet despite the gravity of the crime, no one dares to step forward to challenge his authority, and Ferda Rasnova calmly turns to the lords, asking if they are afraid because of his victim's identity, while he dismissively claims the older mage deserved to die for the sake of the Grand Duchess. So an elderly lord stammers in confusion, wondering how the death of a mage could possibly affect her. Then Ferda Rasnova smiles grimly, stating he only wants the Grand Duchess to be happy, and he explains that the older mage had acted against her wishes, which is why he had to be removed, while the lords find his logic absurd and accuse him of being a complete lunatic. So Ferda Resnova simply tells them not to worry, as he does not care what they think of his actions, and he turns his back on the group, walking away as if the murder was nothing more than a minor errand. Ferda Resnova collapses onto the carriage seat, his body completely drained after the recent magical confrontation, while his head spins violently from the lingering mana exhaustion and the rhythmic swaying of the vehicle, and he curses his luck for crossing paths with the older mage, realizing how much power that single shot cost him. Yet the motion sickness from this primitive carriage is proving to be just as brutal as the fight itself. Ruri observes his pathetic state with a mocking smile, pointing out that killing such a loyal subject will complicate the Grand Duchess's engagement. So Ferda Resnova asks if she really considers the late older mage loyal, only to be told he was one of the few serving the Grand Duchess. And when he questions if the man was even upright, she dismisses the entire regional nobility as moderately corrupt and mediocre, describing how the lords are more interested in lining their own pockets than protecting the front lines. Ferda Resnova insists the engagement must proceed anyway, firmly believing that eliminating such a corrupt figure is perfectly justified. Then he leans back to recover, silently weighing the political fallout of his recent actions against his ultimate goal, and his gaze lingers on the grim package he brought along, which contains the proof of his decisive judgment. Because the older mage was already neck-deep in grave crimes, the young man feels no remorse for the execution. They arrive at the older mage's castle, where a terrified butler greets them under the impression his master is still alive. Ferda Resnova bluntly tells the man that his master is dead, which leaves the servant completely speechless and confused. Then the young man tosses the bloodied bundle at the butler, who fumbles to catch the heavy, gruesome object. Ruri instructs the servant to hang the contents in clear view of the castle gates for all to see. The butler unwraps the package and realizes the horrific truth, recoiling in pure terror as he recognizes his master's severed head. While the sun sets over the estate, casting a long shadow over the site of the former mage's domain, Ferda Resnova wanders through the empty bedroom, feeling as though he is looting a graveyard rather than a lordly residence, and he collapses once more, exhausted, while Ruri sarcastically notes that his display of the head might backfire if the other lords do not see him as a savior. Ferda Resnova considers calling off the engagement while Ruri searches the room for hidden exits. Then he finds a concealed mechanism hidden directly underneath the bed frame. Ruri steps aside so Ferda Resnova can manipulate the switch without any interference. The young man slams his fist into the floor, triggering a heavy hidden latch. An explosion of debris clears as the secret passage finally groans open. They peer into the dark gap, deciding to descend immediately into the hidden depths. Stone stairs spiral down into the damp, lightless bowels of the castle. The air becomes thick with the overpowering stench of rotting blood. A massive underground laboratory reveals piles of mangled human and monster remains. The evidence suggests the late older mage was secretly a follower of demonic arts. Ferda Resnova inspects a soldier's corpse fused with monster parts, clearly the work of a necromancer. The young man seethes at the discovery of such depraved human experimentation. Ruri realizes that killing a noble was the least of the crimes committed in this dungeon. Ferda Resnova produces a document he recovered, revealing how he located the secret lab. His eyes scan the pages intently as he confirms the contents of the file. The text outlines the infinite mana cultivation method, a forbidden technique of the late mage. Visions of the past show the late older mage explaining how monsters naturally generate mana. The mage believes standard monster mana was useless due to its low quality, yet he theorized that recreating the monster's internal process could yield refined results, and this discovery proves the mage sought to create an infinite, corrupted power source. The late mage recounts his plan to build an undead monster army. His goal was to crush the nobles who demoted him using the power of an evil dragon. The notes show his descent into obsession as he aimed to surpass even the greatest mages. He viewed this dark path as the ultimate tool for his own twisted revenge. Ferda Resnova holds the same forbidden document now, realizing it grants a path to 8th Circle mastery. Studying these notes would allow the young man to accelerate his own cultivation significantly. Ruri watches him closely, noting that even he is vulnerable to the same human temptations. The maid points out that since the researcher is dead, no one would ever know if he kept the knowledge. The opportunity to claim this power is what every mage in the Empire craves. Ferda Resnova dismisses the temptation and instructs Ruri to destroy the entire laboratory instead. Ruri questions his resolve, reminding him that the research could revolutionize the field of magic. The young man acknowledges the potential, but he refuses to let such corrupt knowledge survive. He knows that using this power would only bring sorrow to the Grand Duchess he serves. His eyes harden with a cold, decisive resolve that cuts through the surrounding tension. Ruri finally accepts his command, though the weight of the decision clearly hangs heavy between them. Magical flames erupt from his hand, consuming the pages of the forbidden research document instantly. The blue fire intensifies as the essence of the late mage's cursed work begins to vanish. Ferda Resnova explains that the late mage was stained by his own hatred and dark ambition. Thessalos had been consumed by the very same inferiority complex that now threatens to corrupt the spell. The young man chooses to discard the power entirely to ensure he never succumbs to that same hateful legacy. He reflects on the dark necessity of his past self, forced to embrace hatred just to survive. Watching the forbidden research turn to ash, he finds a strange sense of relief in the fire. Ruri voices her lingering disdain for the late mage, calling him a masochistic, unpredictable psycho, keeping her focus on the future. The maid urges him to leave the ruins behind them immediately. Ferda Resnova agrees, wanting to avoid the stench of blood before his upcoming engagement ceremony. They arrive at the castle grounds, where the grand event is finally set to take place. Stepping into the hall, the young man confirms to his aide that his vows are ready. He holds the written promises, though he ironically calls the act of self-written vows romantic. Ruri mutters that a stable might actually be cleaner than the political mess they are entering. Despite her clear disapproval of the match, the maid remains dedicated to the Grand Duchess's happiness. She insists on grooming his ceremonial outfit. Demanding he keep the starch crisp and unwrinkled, the young man notes how quiet the lords have been since their last formal summons. Ruri observes that the regional leaders are ignoring their frontline duties to focus on greed. Corruption has run rampant as the lords exploit the people, pushing the territory toward a major riot. The young man questions why the Grand Duchess refuses to step in and stop the rot. Ruri cryptically promises that the reason for her inaction will soon become painfully obvious. A heavy set of doors looms before them, and the maid motions for him to wait. The ceremony begins with an ominous, overwhelming pressure emanating from the chamber beyond. Ferda Resnova stumbles as a crushing, suffocating wave of magical force hits him head-on. The air itself turns heavy and toxic, threatening to shatter his resolve and his body entirely. The young man stares at the ominous, glowing presence looming behind the chamber doors. Ruri stands calmly amidst the crushing magical pressure. Reciting a ritual oath about the union of mortal and immortal, she begins pouring a mysterious, glowing liquid into a ceremonial vessel. The maid carefully fills the bowl to the brim, signaling the start of the binding process. Ferda Resnova lifts the drink to his lips, forced to participate in this bizarre, suffocating ceremony. The liquid tastes strange and carries an unnatural, dragon-like aura that slowly begins to dull his senses. As he finishes the draft, Ruri continues her chant about casting off the futility of time. Suddenly, the massive clawed presence outside slams against the chamber, shaking the entire foundation. The table jolts violently, spilling the remnants of the ritual drink as the atmosphere shifts. Time seems to loop as the young man finds himself drinking from the bowl yet again. He struggles to maintain his sanity, realizing he has already repeated this cycle far too many times. Dizziness hits him hard as he senses the ritual is becoming increasingly unstable and dangerous. The maid's composed exterior finally cracks under the strain of the relentless magical interference. Ruri abruptly steps away from the table, unable to maintain her role in the face of the ongoing disruption. Ferda Resnova slumps over, left alone as the ritual environment begins to collapse around him. Ruri snaps at Ferda with furious authority, demanding to know what he thinks he's doing right now. She catches him frozen on the floor, losing patience with a groom who refuses to stand. Her voice booms through the chamber, ordering him to come out proudly and greet his fiancée. The command echoes like a royal decree, pointing him toward the bride waiting beyond the doors. Then silence falls as Ruri storms off, leaving Ferda reeling alone on the stone floor. The maid clarifies that the massive roar was just a necessary precaution, and she explains to Ferda Resnova that his future bride suffers from severe social anxiety, claiming the dragon stays hidden in her lair because she is reluctant to deal with humans, leaving the young man wondering how an engagement ceremony could possibly proceed under these conditions, until a hulking, armored figure steps through the heavy doors and approaches them, causing the armored guest to kneel directly across from the confused groom. While Ferda Resnova notes how unusual it is for a dragon's supposedly beautiful form to be encased in war-ready plate, the dragon declares they will resume the ceremony immediately despite her intimidating combat appearance. And she recites a cryptic passage about merging the mortal and the immortal, pouring a drink into the ritual bowl while the young man watches in total silence, before the dragon finally lifts her massive helmet to reveal her face, and the sight of her expression catches the young man completely off guard, leaving Ferda Resnova visibly affected by her sudden proximity and revealed features, as the dragon carefully presents a document to her groom. Holding the sacred vows between her gauntleted hands with surprising grace, the dragon offers a soft, welcoming smile that contrasts sharply with her earlier armor, making Ferda Resnova realize the engagement wine might have suppressed his primal fear. So the maid encourages him to start reading the vows they prepared for one another, and the young man takes a breath, bracing himself to speak the words aloud as he begins to recite the romantic promise that he has finally given his heart away. Ferda Resnova continues his vows, acknowledging how the dragon showed noble dignity even when he betrayed her, noting how she embraced what she hated and stayed true to her own heart. So he swears a solemn oath right there in the ritual hall, promising to give his heart back in return, and he confesses that she is his sovereign and his everything, though he decides to add a personal touch that was not on the paper, telling the bride how deeply honored he is to be engaged to such a beauty. And the maid watches as the dragon hesitates to read her own vow. Then the dragon turns away abruptly, leaving the young man standing there in confusion while she walks out of the chamber alone, and the heavy doors slam shut, leaving the maid to confirm the ceremony is officially finished. So Ferda Rasnova asks if he can seclude himself for the next 3 days, while the maid clasps her hands together in excitement, convinced that everything is going exactly according to his grand design. As she praises his tactical brilliance and ability to fool everyone with his strategy, even though Ferda Rasnova watches the vow paper drift away, and the dragon settles down in the distance, unaware that their romantic moment just hit a massive snag.